Well, howdy YouTube, Unky Joe here, Unky Joe's Playhouse. Today we're gonna put the old 2U Super Micro back to work. Well, I've already put it back to work. It's running server 2019, but I need a virtual machine and I need to update some of my images and I need to create a backup or secondary domain controller. Wow, that's a lot to do in one video, but we're gonna make it happen today. So this unit right behind me, the 2U unit that was running Proxmox a couple of weeks ago, we've got Windows Server 2019 back on it. Everything's in it. It's got a X3470 processor. It's a Xeon 16 gig of RAM, and I just put a 250 gig Samsung SSD in there so that we can load Windows Server on it and run some VMs. And today we're going to do just that. So it's kind of a two-part video. One where I'm going to show you how to update and re-Sysprep a Windows Server 2019 image because it's been about a year since we updated ours. And number two is how to create a secondary domain controller for your Active Directory network. So let's get this party started right now. I'm over on Daedalus, which is the unit that was run. It's the 2U server unit that was running Proxmox before. And of course it's running Windows Server 2019 right now. And you can see it's a quad-core 8-thread Intel Xeon X3470 CPU, 16 gig of RAM. A very power-efficient server. This one has the Super Micro motherboard in it. Now what I need to do is import my Windows Server 2019 image, which was made in June of 2019. So I want to import that. I want to open it up, and I want to go ahead and do the updates on it, and then I want to re-Sysprep it as my new Server 2019 image. Normally I redo my images every 6 months, but this one got away from me, so I want to go ahead and get that done today. So what I've done is I've copied that image over from my NAS because you can't import from a Synology NAS because Synology doesn't have the correct permissions that a Windows domain controller is looking for. Yeah, I know it's a long, convoluted answer to something that should be simple. But all I did was copy the image over from my Synology NAS to the local SSD drive that's on this machine. And then we're simply going to come up here and go to Import Virtual Machine. Follow the wizard. Go out to where I saved that virtual machine, which is right here under exports. Select that folder, and as you can see it was created on 6/3 of 2019, so it's quite old. I'm going to click on next. We're going to copy the virtual machine. It's very important you do that because you want it to create a new unique ID under Hyper-V. Click on next. Select your location where you're going to store the machine. I'm just accepting the defaults right now. Same way with the virtual hard drive, I'm just accepting the default. Now it should prompt me here that the network card is different because we had a 10 gig in that one. So we'll just set it up with a 1 gig virtual network card here in this one. Click on next and then finish. And then hopefully this will take maybe 5 or 10 minutes to import, and then we can fire the unit up and start updating it. So as you can see, we were successful. We got the image imported. I'm going to go ahead and connect to it. So I'm going to go right click and choose connect. Now hopefully if all went well, this unit should boot up in out of the box experience. So we'll need to go through and set it up. No, it did not like it. Oh, it did not like it because the CD is not attached. So let's go into File and Settings. Yeah, it's looking for the DVD drive. There is none. So hopefully, if I take that out and click on Start, we should have some success. Yay! So if you read the screen and see what the error message is, you can generally figure it out pretty easily without having a PhD in computers. I don't even know if they offer a PhD in computers, to be honest with you. Alright, so what we're going to do is we're going to let this boot up. We're going to go ahead and get it set up because it's going to enter the out-of-box experience. And then what we're going to do is do all the updates on it. So I'm going to go ahead and get this unit booted. I'm going to get all the updates done on it. And then we're going to try to sysprep it again and see if we have any success. So there's no need for you to sit here and watch me run updates on Windows. You know how it's done. I will bring you back when we start doing the sysprep. So you've got that to look forward to. All right, so according to Microsoft, I've got all the updates done on this Windows Server 2019 system. Let's just go into Server Manager, show you how responsive this virtual machine is. You know, SSDs make all the difference, my friends. So, you know, we're getting some errors in here, but that's normal. When you first load Windows, you're going to get, as things settle in, you're going to get errors. So let's go back to Windows Update and let's just make sure that we've actually completed all of our updates. I'll check it one more time. You know, sometimes you can do this 3 or 4 times and then it will come up all of a sudden and say there are updates. Now, according to this, Windows is up to date. So let's do a little winver command on it. So version 1809 build 17763. I think that is the most recent. So if all of that has gone well, I should be able to go out and sysprep this unit. So we'll go to Windows. We're going to go to System 32. And then under there should be a sysprep folder. And there is. And then we're going to just run sysprep. So now I want to enter the out-of-box experience. I want to generalize and I want it to shut down. So let's see if it'll let this run. Sometimes if you've run Sysprep on a system once, it keeps track of that and it won't let you run it again. That's mainly on Windows 10, depending on what updates you have in there. But hopefully we'll get lucky with Server 2019. So we'll let this run. It's going to take a couple of minutes. It usually does. And then if we're successful, we should be able to shut down the virtual machine on its own. And then what we'll need to do is we'll need to export it to make a copy of it that we can then save onto our Synology NAS as our new Windows Server 2019 image. Again, normally I would do this every 6 months, but, you know, it just got away from me. Been busy with other things, you know. And look at this. I'm almost out of coffee. Woohoo! Yes! It's now shut down. So it should be good. Should be sysprep. So now what I can do is just simply right click on the machine and choose export. And then actually let me do this. Let me go into File Explorer. Let me get rid of this one right here. We don't need that one anymore. And then let me want to empty the recycle bin. And then we'll go ahead and export it again. So we'll browse to the exports folder, select it, choose export, and this will take a few minutes. So we'll let this run, and so we'll let this run. I'll come back when it's completed. All right, so it appears that the export was successful. So let's go out and verify that. We'll go to the exports folder. Let's see, virtual hard disk. Yes, it's got today's date. So what I want to do now is I want to copy this. So I'm going to right click and choose copy. And I'm going to go back to my NAS to the exports folder. And I'm going to paste it here. And I'm going to replace the file in the destination. So we'll let this copy back over. This is going to take about 4 minutes. We'll see. The speed's jumping up, so it should hit 100 megabits and stay there. So we'll let this copy come back when that's done. All right, so we got that moved over. Let's refresh and see if it sees a new date on there. Let's see. Yes, 7/1 of 2020. And this, folks, in a nutshell, is one of the reasons I use Hyper-V. You see how easy that was to export and import a machine, create a new one, sysprep it, export it out again? Yay. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to rename this machine, because this is going to be MCS DC02. It's going to be a second domain controller for my company network. So, MCS DC02, DC01 is our primary domain controller. I also want to change the name of this hard drive, so I'm going to go ahead and browse to where that is, and then I'm going to right click and rename it MCS DC02 so that we can keep everything consistently named. And go ahead and apply that. Blah, blah, blah. I'm going to keep the 2 cores, or 2 virtual CPUs, and how much RAM was it? 2 or 4 gig? 2. We'll go ahead and bump that up to 4 gig of RAM. And let's go ahead and connect. And we're going to fire it up, and it should enter the out-of-box experience mode, meaning that we've successfully sysprepped it. Now it detects it's booting up for the first time. And then, of course, I have to create another domain controller, which is the whole reason for this video, was to create a virtual domain controller. Now, this 2U unit that used to run Proxmox, it's now running Windows Server 2019, is also going to be a secondary daily driver machine. I'm going to use it in coordination or in combination with the Dell R720 that is currently running a lot of virtual machines for me. Both of those are going to be real-time units that are running actual software that I use in my business. And then the other Dells and IBMs are going to be reserved for, doing labs and that kind of thing. So but this is a very powerful little machine. This Super Micro, you've seen me do other videos on it. And so it should handle the load just fine. So now we're going into the out-of-box experience mode. Getting Windows oh, I typed that wrong. I hit the caps lock. And keep in mind when I type, I'm having to do it around a microphone, so. Okay, so there we are. It looks like Windows Server 2019 is up and running. Let me log in just to verify. And we'll make sure all the updates have been. It's going to load Server Manager the first time, which is fine. Now, just so you know, a domain controller puts very little impact on a system, especially if it's a secondary domain controller, like this one's going to be, because there's just not much for it to do, Now, if you've got a large network, 100, 200 users, then it'll be a busy little bugger just providing DNS and DHCP. But right now, this is just set up as a standalone server. And it sees, sees the processors. Yeah, 2 Xeon processors, 4 gig of RAM, 126 gig hard drive. So let's go to Windows Update, just make sure we got all the updates done. That was the whole reason of doing this in the first place. And you see it's not bad for 10-year-old equipment. It's pretty speedy. The SSD is the thing that helps out the most here. Now once we start loading this thing up with virtual machines, and see there's yet another update. You can you saw me. I did the updates before I sysprepped the image. There were no updates. I did it 4 or 5 times. There were no updates. Now there was an update. That's all right. It did it. All right. So the next step now will be to set up a secondary domain controller. So, another day, another dollar. So let's get some stuff out of the way here. Now, in my defense, I was just going to do one video on how to update your Windows Server image. If you've followed along with my lab videos in the past, you'll know that I have a system where I back up all my images to when I create them. I'm committed to Hyper-V now. I'm not interested in Proxmox or XCPNG or even for that matter VMware. They're great products. They have their use. I just don't have a use for them in my environment. So I store all my images out of my NAS out on MCS NAS, which is a DS918 Plus, under a folder called Exports. Now, if I had a true Windows server sharing these files out, I wouldn't have to copy them from my Hyper-V machine over to my NAS, but because the permissions are just a slightly bit different with the Synology NAS than they are on a real Windows server, you have to have something called a system privilege on a share. Otherwise, you cannot export to that share. So rather than futz with it, I just export it to my local drive and then copy it over here to this folder under Exports. And that's what I did with that Sysprep image. Now, what I want to do now is I want to go ahead and create a secondary domain controller. My primary domain controller is on my Synology DS918 Plus. The reason I opted as a virtual machine, the reason I opted to do that is because I want to be able to take down whatever equipment I need to without having to bring my domain controller down. And it's seldom, if ever, I bring down that DS918 Plus. It runs all the time. It uses very little power. And really, a domain controller in a small network like mine does not need to have a lot of power on it. So it serves my needs well. But on the off times that I do bring down my Synology NAS for maintenance or whatever, I would really like to be able to have a backup domain controller up and running so that my network would go on uninterrupted. So, all right, so I have this is my MCS DC02, or it's going to be, up and running here. So the first thing we want to do is we want to go out and give this machine a different name. So to do that, you can I've got the server manager up and running here. Just click on the computer name, go to change, and then we're going to call this MCS-DC02. Now, hopefully, I don't already have a machine out there named that. Now, with Windows, every time you rename a machine, something like that, you have to restart the machine. So, I'm going to try to do this with as few interruptions as I can, so you can see how the actual speed is on this Super Micro motherboard that I'm running Hyper-V on. Now, the other thing I'm going to do is I'm also going to go ahead and join the domain. But I need to give this a hard-coded IP address. Anytime I set up domain controllers, anything like that, or servers for that matter, I always give them a hard-coded IP address. Now, I already have the IP address of 2 reserved for this unit, or set aside for this unit. So what I want to do, though, is I just want to verify that IP address is not in use. So I'm just going to bring up the command prompt. I'm going to ping that IP real quick to make sure there's nothing out there. 5.1 is my primary domain controller. This will be my secondary domain controller. Alright, so now that I know that IP address is available, I can go ahead and get it set up here. So let me walk you through that. I have a nasty habit of doing things without telling people how I'm doing them. So, click here on the IPv. It only sees that it has one Ethernet card in there, so we're going to click on the IPv4 address. Right-click on the network controller, go to Properties, and then go to TCP IP4. So we'll go ahead and type in the IP gateway. You know, I always keep my gateways at 254, and then the DNS server. We have an internal DNS server, and that's 5.1. Click OK on both of these. Yes, that network is fine. Let's go ahead and get a status. Make sure that took. It did. Close. Close. Go ahead and close that, and then we can click the little refresh button up here. And we should see 5.2 and IPv6 enabled. Now, the next thing I want to do is join my domain. So we'll click here where it says workgroup. I'll click the change button again. Come here to the member of, and in the domain box, I'm going to type in mcs.local. Click OK. And then it should prompt me for that administrative password and username. Go ahead and click OK. go ahead and I'm going to close that and restart. Now, while that's restarting, let's talk about something. A lot of people will tell you, hey, don't set up a domain controller in a virtual machine. Ah, bullshit. Maybe not in a production environment, but in our lab environment, it's fine. And the beauty of setting up this as a virtual machine is I can move it to whatever Hyper-V machine I have running. So keep that in mind. That's another good reason to set up this machine as a virtual machine. It's just a secondary domain controller. So now when we log on, we need to log on to the MCS domain. I get a lot of people telling you don't have to type the MCS in there. Okay, I do it anyway. The MCS /. You can do whatever you choose, but sometimes it'll come up and it won't notice that it's on the MCS domain. So I just make sure as a creature of habit that I do that. Now the first time it comes up, it's joined you to the domain. It's going to set up a new profile for you. So just be aware of that. And then it should launch Server Manager. And we should now see that we're now a member of the domain. Our Windows firewall is on. Remote desktop. I'm going to go ahead and enable remote desktop. It'll just make our lives easier in the future. Now that gave us a warning about the firewall, but once you enable it, it will automatically enable the firewall rule to allow remote desktop connections to this computer. So there you go. So now we've got the unit with its own hard-coded dedicated IP address. We've joined the domain. The next step is to make this a domain controller. Now, what I used to do in the olden days is I'd just go out to a command prompt and I would type DC promo, DCPROMO, and bing bang boom, it would do it all for me. Now we have these wizards within Microsoft Windows, and I think they started this with Server 2016. Don't quote me on that, though. It's been a while. But basically, you're going to do everything up here through the Manage button. So I'm going to go up to Manage, Add Roles and Features. I'm going to click Next. Now this is going to be a role-based or feature-based installation. So I'm going to click on Next again. Make darn certain that if you have multiple network cards, sometimes you'll see one of these IP addresses could be a DHCP auto configure IP, the 169.whatever.whatever. So make sure you check this, that your IP address is correct for your server before you click on the next button, or you could have problems moving forward. So we're going to click on Next. Now what I'm going to do is do the Active Directory Domain Services. So it's going to add all these little roles. So I'm going to go ahead and add the feature. Next. Next. Now you notice it flagged Group Policy Management for me automatically. Next. And it's telling me about Active Directory. We could use Azure Online. In fact, I may be doing that next year. I haven't decided yet whether I'm going to put my Active Directory as part of my Office 365 subscription. That way it would eliminate the need of having any domain controllers, but I'm old school. I like having control over at least my domain controller on my domain. You know, what if the internet goes down, that kind of thing. So I'm going to click on Next here, and it's going to install all of these items, but it's not going to make it a domain controller. So there'll be another step we have to do after that. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Install. And then I'm going to let this run, and it probably will tell us at the end of this that we need to run the DC promo. Alright, so all told that took less than 5 minutes, so I'm going to click on Close here. Now you notice I have a little yellow exclamation point there, so if I click on it, I now have the ability, it says Post-Deployment Configuration, to promote this server to a domain controller. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to click on this. Now what I'm going to do is add a domain controller to an existing domain. We have two other choices, which is add a new domain to an existing for us, or add a new for us. We're not going to worry about those. The domain is MCS local. It's filled this out for me automatically. Supply the credentials to perform this operation. So MCS Adama is the current user. That's the one it's going to use. I'm going to click on Next. Okay, I want it to have DNS, and I want it to be a global catalog server. And then I need to put in a directory services restore mode password. So pick a secure password like I am doing and enter that in there in case you ever have to restore the Active Directory at some point in the future. You'll have that, you'll have a password for that. I'm going to click on Next. Okay, a delegation for this DNS server cannot be created because the authoritative parent zone cannot be found. That's because it hasn't created the DNS server yet. So that's fine. You can accept that. Click on next. Okay. One thing is it's asking where do you want to replicate from. So I could select MCSDC01, or I could just leave it at the default of any domain controller. So we should be good there. Click on next. So that's where I want the database, log files, and sysvol. You can accept those as defaults. Click on next. And then one of the nice things I've covered before about Microsoft, that if you're a script kiddie, you're a person who likes to see the script, you can click on this button here, and there's a Powershell script that will do all of these items for you. So you can, in theory, go out and edit that Powershell script, even have it program variables into it to where it would prompt you, so you don't have to use the wizard every time. I'm going to go ahead and click on next, and then it's going to go out and it's going to check, and as long as you get a green check mark, you're okay. However, you should view the cryptography. It's warning you about default security settings and delegations, but you're okay. Don't worry about those. Click on install, let it run, and we'll see. We'll come back when it's done. It's going to take a few minutes because it's going to install DNS, group policy, and a bunch of other software, and then we'll come back and see if we're successful. So, Danger Will Robbins, it's about to sign me out because it's going to be restarted because it's installing Active Directory. So, that took less than 3 minutes actually. By the time I'd paused the recording of the video and started it again, it was ready to reboot. So, might as well do it live here, as they say. Alright, so I'm assuming we're going to be logging onto the domain. It should come up to Server Manager and tell me that it is now a domain controller. At some point, I'm hoping. Now you'll see we have Active Directory, Directory Services, and DNS. Okay, and we're getting some warnings. Okay, it's waiting for Active Directory to signal the initial synchronization of the directory has been completed. And so we're going to get some errors on here. It's waiting to perform the initial replication. So what I would recommend is you let the server come up and run about 5 or 10 minutes. Go back and check your Active Directory and your DNS to make sure all is well. It'll take about 5 or 10 minutes for it to what it's doing is it's going out to the primary domain controller, getting all of the Active Directory database information and replicating that to this new backup domain controller. Now, one of the other things we can do is we can go out and check and see if DNS has been installed. And I believe it has. Yes. So we'll just verify it's in there. Yes, it is. And we should see our zones. Yes, you'll see mcs.local. You'll see we got mcstx.net because I do a what do they call that? I do an internal DNS for some of my external websites. I forget what they call that, what the technical term is. But I've got Unky Joe's Playhouse here. I've got mcstx, and I've got mcs.local. And it looks like all my computers are there, all my computer accounts, DNS accounts. So, I know DNS is working. Let's just go check Active Directory. Still got that error that was at 103. Still got the error on DNS, but it looks like everything has propagated over. Now, the one thing we could do is go into Administrative Tools and go into Active Directory Users and Computers. In fact, I'm going to put that on the desktop here, and then I'm going to also put DNS. Just create a couple of shortcuts to them, so that if I need to, I can get into either one of those. Yes, and it looks like it's replicating everything over. That's good. So, what benefit now do I have with a secondary domain controller? Well, if I were to take down the Synology DS918 where my primary domain controller is running, this would take over for it in the background. Now, one thing I will need to do is under DHCP server on my primary server is I will need to go and give it a new DNS server, because we now have 2 DNS servers that could respond to queries on the network. So this is my primary domain controller. So what I can do now is list my secondary DNS server as my secondary domain controller, if that makes any sense. So I'll go under DHCP, and you can see how much slower it is. Let's go ahead and expand this. All right. So go to Scope and go to Options right here. So my DNS servers now can be, I can add one, 192.168.5.2. Caps or numlock wasn't on. Click on Add, and it should resolve it. Yes, it did. It resolved it. So I'm going to go ahead and move that up and click on Apply and then OK. So what will happen now is when it goes to hand out DHCP addresses, it'll list the DNS servers in this order, 5.1, 5.2, and then these 2 DNS servers here that I use for filtering. And I believe I also have those. Let's go look at DNS. I believe I have those servers listed as forwarders. Let me look here. Go to properties at the root, forwarders. Yeah. So I've got these 2 Raspberry Pi DNS servers listed as my forwarders under my DNS for my Active Directory. So anything my Active Directory can't resolve will then forward to these 2 DNS servers. That's how I have my DNS set up. Everybody's got different ways of setting up DNS. If you don't have an Active Directory network, it really won't apply to you. But I just thought I'd share that with everybody just so they could see it. Well, there you go. So it's something I've been putting off for months and months and months, was getting a backup domain controller, but I finally did it. I finally decided that we're just going to keep Windows Server 2019 on this little 2U rack unit. When this thing is running at full, when it's running at idle, it only consumes about 35 watts of power. Right now, with one virtual machine running on it, a domain controller, it's pulling about 40 watts of power. So once I'm going to be putting some additional virtual machines on there, because I'm going back to try and virtualize everything that runs my business. That includes my PBX system, and I'll do a video on that, on how I move it from a physical machine to a virtual machine again. And then this unit has 2 network cards in there, so we might be able to virtualize even a router or something like that in the future. So, but for right now, it's just running an Active Directory domain controller, and it'll be like my overflow virtualization server. And frankly, the flexibility this gives me now is, if I ever need to do something on my primary domain controller or that Synology DS918 Plus, I'll be able to bring that domain controller down, and the other one will just kind of take up where it left off. I won't have any interruption in network function or activity, so it's a win-win for me. So there you go, YouTube. We hope you found the video entertaining and informative. As always, please give us a like, thumbs up down below. I guess it's a like. Yeah, it's a thumbs up, Joe. Leave your comments down in the comments section to help us with those lovely YouTube algorithms. Donate if you're so inclined. We take PayPal and we take Patreon. And for those of you that are adverse to either of those two, donating on either of those services, you can now click on the join button on any one of my videos here at Unky Joe's Playhouse, and for $1.99 a month, you can support the channel. Now, this subscription will continue until you cancel it, and you might be used in third-party advertising. That's per Google's disclaimer. So when you click the join button, read the little disclaimer down there. But I think $1.99 a month for those of you that get something out of this channel would be greatly appreciated. Of course, we put all those funds into buying lovely products for the channel so we can evaluate and share them with you. So anyway, thanks again for coming to see us, and please don't forget, we'll see you on the other side. Have a great 4th of July.